It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. If you reach out to me through my email, OppermanInvestigations@gmail.com. Today we got a very exciting show for you. We have Greg Palast coming back. It's one of those Kismet kind of shows. I just emailed him the other night and I said, hey, Greg, can you come back and help us out with this situation? We had him on 4 months ago, and things were so positive, and we talked about his film, which is Vigilantes, Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitman. You can find it. It's narrated by Rosario Dawson and produced by Martin Sheen. Leonardo DiCaprio made it released on his website for free at gregpalast.com. You can find Greg Palast, too, on Twitter as Greg Palast. He's the author of the book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. He's a great guest. He's an expert on election shenanigans, if you want to describe him in some way or another. Greg Palast, are you there?
I am here. I'm speaking to you from Chicago. And thank you for having me on. I just wrote a piece at gregpalast.com if you want to follow this along, called Trump Lost, Vote Suppression Won. Here are the numbers. And for those who don't know me, Greg Palast, I was an investigative reporter for BBC Television and the Guardian newspapers out of Britain, also Rolling Stone. And I'm an investigative reporter, but before that, I was more in Ed's field. I was an investigator working for several attorneys general, the U.S. Justice Department. I am what is called a forensic economist. That's a detective who's good with numbers. And I went through the numbers of what happened in this election, and the answer is it's pretty ugly. We had a Jim Crow apartheid election, and I can give you with numbers, because I also used to teach statistics at Indiana University, and I want people to understand what the numbers of this election were, and that if it weren't for Jim Crow, Kamala Harris would be president.
Yeah, you warned us. You warned us, bro. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, at the time, I was kind of keeping it under my hat. I was doing some opposition research for the Democrats, and I went to them and I says, "Hey, man, you got to watch this film, this Vigilantes by Greg Palast." And also to that thing about you taught me about. Don't take the provisional ballot, right? Was that it? The provisional ballot when you go to the sign to vote?
The provisional ballot. I call them placebo ballots. You think you voted, but you haven't. You go in, and this, for some reason your name isn't on the voter rolls. Now, that means that this year, for the first time, you may have been challenged. I'll go through that. You may have been purged. There may be all kinds of problems. They don't like your ID. Right. They'll say, oh, hey, the little lady behind the desk, and she means good. She just doesn't know, which is that she's going to tell you, all you have to do is fill out this provisional ballot, a paper ballot, and you stick it in an envelope and you write your information back. So they'll check your registration, then they'll count your ballot. No, they won't. Provisional ballots. Are you ready for this? In this past election, 1,216,000 ballots, so 1.25 million provisional ballots were cast and rejected. According to, we have a government agency called the United States Elections Assistance Commission. Their job is not only to track the vote count, but they track something that we don't talk about, the vote non-count, ballots which are disqualified, not counted, and the number of voters who are prevented from voting. And according to the United States government, 42.3% of all those provisional ballots, it's nearly half of the provisional ballots that are cast, if you get one of those. Nearly half of them are thrown in the garbage. And so, but you know what, I'll tell you, Ed, it wouldn't matter if it were random, if it was just it's a lot of votes, over 1 million, that are thrown out. But if it's random, it doesn't affect an election. It ain't random. Right. If you're black, Hispanic, or Asian American, the chance you will be shunted to a provisional ballot is 300% higher than if you're white. And that makes the difference. That has swung states, shoving voters of color to these provisional ballots. In addition, we have ballots which you cast called spoiled ballots, about 585,000. Notice I'm using these government numbers, which is why I waited so long to put out this report. About 585,000 votes that were cast in precincts weren't counted. Now, what does that mean? In other words, you go in and you on the paper ballot and you put an X instead of filling in a bubble, or they can't read it correctly. But they have all kinds of reasons to mess with your ballot. Mail-in ballots, the same thing. But for example, are you ready for this, Ed? 2,120,000 mail-in ballots were disqualified. Let me repeat that. Over 2 million ballots in the 2024 election, mail-in ballots were disqualified. Now, who are those ballots? If you're a Democrat, it's 51% more likely that you will vote by mail than if you're a Republican. So you start out with Democratic votes. According to the state of Washington, a lot of those votes are not counted. It's really, according to NPR of all places, they said 1 in 7 ballots, mail-in ballots, are not counted. Now, according to MIT, a study done from MIT, it's even, the loss is even higher. But let's go 1 in 7 ballots. That's from NPR. But again, MIT has a much higher number, and so does the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission. Here's the problem. According to the state of Washington, if you're black, the chance your ballot will be disqualified is 400% higher than if you're white. Now, what does it mean disqualified? Postage due. You registered with your middle initial, but on the outside of the envelope that you mailed in, you didn't include your middle initial. They play all these gotcha games, and they know, by the way, your race, they know your party, they know your zip code, they know who you're voting for. So they don't have to look at your ballot to know that they're going to challenge it and disqualify it. So again, if you're black, 400% higher chance your mail-in ballot will be disqualified on one of these picayune cockamamie grounds.
Wait a second. So you're saying that they receive the mail-in ballot and they know you're black before they count it?
Well, two things. In places like Georgia, Mississippi, Florida, it says BLA next to your name if you're black. So they ain't guessing. That's number one. Number two, obviously, they know registration in states where you register with party. The other is that, you vote like your neighbors. They know your zip code. They play the numbers, the statistics. But again, the fact that 400% higher rejection rates for blacks than whites in Washington State, which probably has, of the 50 states, I would say Washington State probably has the least vote suppression in America. And that's 400, still biased against blacks in a major way. By the way, that's an all mail-in state. So what is happening is most black people in America vote by mail, drop box, or in person early. So the majority of African Americans in America vote early, and they are under deep attack, and that's what happened in this election. So 2.12 million ballots rejected. Now, here is the total rejection rate for black people, according to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but get ready for this one. If you are black, the chance your ballot will be disqualified for some technical reason is 900% higher than if you're white. That's a U.S. government statistic. That ain't Greg Palast. By the way, if you want all these numbers, go to gregpalast.com. That's GregPalast, gregpalast.com, and you can see my report with all the numbers. Like I say, I'm a numbers guy. By the way, as Ed mentioned at the beginning, you can also stream my film for free. Jamie Foxx and Leonardo DiCaprio paid to allow people to watch this film for free as a public service. It is a movie. Bring some popcorn. You can get.
No, it's a good movie. It's a very entertaining movie. Yeah, it's not a boring movie.
It's an entertaining movie, but it also gives you all this information. So stream that at gregpalast.com, and you can also get the details, all these numbers for your goofy cousin in Iowa who thinks that Trump won the election. He only won because of these Jim Crow tactics. And by the way, Ed, these Jim Crow tactics, knocking out the provisional ballots, spoiled ballots, knocking out mail-in ballots, and then we get into the purges and the other things we'll talk about, cost Kamala Harris Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Those 4 states were swiped away by these ugly vote suppression tactics. And if not for vote suppression, she would have won those 4 states and 286 electoral votes winning the election.
Greg Palast, let me interrupt you because I want to establish a couple of things here. First of all, people should go for this interview right now tonight as we're talking to gregpalast.com and follow along in this article he wrote about what we're talking about now. Like he said, there's a lot of numbers. Another thing I want to establish is Greg Palast is an expert on voter shenanigans. Am I wrong?
That's correct. You understand, I work not only for the United States Justice Department and about 20 attorneys general in America, but I've gone into federal court with these numbers. So, you have to defend this stuff. I'm an expert at this, and so I went to court for the ACLU, Black Voters Matter, NAACP of Georgia, and Rainbow Push, Reverend Jesse Jackson's organization. We go into federal court to try to reverse some of these horrible things. The law is not all that favorable in many ways because you have about a third of the federal judges today have been appointed by Donald Trump, and they are not too favorable to protecting voting rights. That's just sorry to announce that. But it's hard to even win in federal courts. But we have done successfully these things. So I'm an expert. I go into court. I do this for the U.S. Justice Department and others. This is my expertise. And that's why there's all these numbers, because that's what I do is numbers. It's hard numbers. It's from the government. That's the important thing to understand. I work from the government numbers, which are kind of hidden away in these little agencies, but we got them.
It's so important to explain to the audience because you got this guy like Mike Lindell who's rambling all this crazy stuff, but here we got a real guy.
I will admit, Ed,
yeah.
I can't sell you a pillow, but I can tell you the statistics. But if you want a pillow, I'm the wrong.
I'll sell them the pillows. Don't worry, man. But then, Greg, Greg Palast, let me ask you this, man. Okay, if we know all this, okay, this can't be a secret to the big shots over in the Democratic Party. Why are they encouraging people to use mail-in ballots? They were telling me to mail in my ballot, and I told them no. Greg Palast says no.
Well, here's what you want to do. If we know this, if you use a mail-in ballot, it increases turnout enormously. Yeah. So even if they do knock out 1 in 7 ballots, the Democratic Party, I don't think is wrong strategically by saying just mail in your ballot. Because in urban areas, like I was in Georgia, in the black, I was in black precincts in Atlanta. You had 3, 4, 5 hour waits. You go to the white suburbs, there's no wait. So the Democratic Party is saying, look, if you're urban, they're making sure that you have to wait in line forever. They will not give you enough voting stations. So mail in your ballot. Just get it done because it's hard for people to wait in line 5 hours. And so I don't think the Democratic Party is wrong strategically. But if you're going to mail in your ballot, oh boy, you better be so careful. It says fill in a bubble. Fill in the bubble. My mother, who was a school teacher, my sister is a lawyer, lost their vote in San Diego because they didn't fill in a bubble correctly. They lost their votes. Because, by the way, a lot of states allow you, if you have mail-in ballot, to check whether your vote got counted. So their votes weren't counted. And I'm talking about a lawyer. I'm talking about a teacher. You're not talking about people who don't know what they're doing. But there's all kinds of gotchas that the Republican Party can use. In fact, in San Diego, talk about where my sister and mom's votes were disqualified, Democratic votes. The Democrat had won, Donna Fry, for mayor of San Diego, and then they disqualified 5,000 of her votes because the bubble wasn't properly filled in. The Republican judge overturned the election. So I'm not crazy. If you can avoid a mail-in ballot, avoid it. Vote early so that if there's a problem with your ballot or your registration, you get that straightened out. There's things you can do, but nevertheless, there is no question that mail-in balloting favors Democrats, which is why Donald Trump has been on this crusade that all mail-in ballots are phony and fraudulent, and that's nonsense. He says, they're coming in from China. You cannot, just so you know, I want anyone who votes by mail, take a look at the outside of your envelope. There's a barcode on it. That's your barcode. Only you can vote that ballot. Now, because people don't realize, your ballot is not secret. Only your actual vote is secret. So, okay, if you voted for Harris, you voted for Trump, that's secret. What's not secret is that you voted. That envelope information is specific to you. Everyone gets a unique barcode. You cannot simply copy and put in a second ballot unless you want to go to jail for 5 years under federal law. And so people don't do that.
No,
So,
great.
and again, yeah.
I hate to keep interrupting because I know you're on a roll and I kind of get you. I'm trying.
Okay.
But I got questions, man. Now, is there somewhere like the Board of Elections, Democrats, Republicans, anywhere, Greg Palast's website, gregpalast.com, where there's a video that says, hey, this is how you fill out your ballot. This is how you do it correctly so it doesn't get shot back out. Oh, boy.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Common sense.
You the Democratic Party say, here's how to fill. Well, you know what? If you go to gregpalast.com, you will actually see in this article, Trump lost vote suppression 1. You'll see an African American, a career military officer, Major Gamaliel Turner, and he is showing his absentee ballot. He actually did several little photos, everything. Here's how you fill out a mail-in ballot, and he says, here's how you fill it out. Here's how you put it in. Make sure it goes in on time. Guess what? This is an African-American soldier. Fills out his ballot. He does it on camera to show you how to do it. They didn't count his ballot. They disqualified his ballot. So there you go. And does it have to do with the fact that he happens to be an African-American soldier? Oh, yes, it does. Because this is the same soldier. This is the same guy.
I remember that guy.
Who the from my film, Vigilantes Inc., where vigilante vote challengers challenged his vote and he lost his vote in the 2020 election runoff because this is brand new. This is brand new, Ed, where for the first time since 1946, the Republican Party has run a campaign to challenge black voters en masse. In 1946, the Klan did this because there's about 20 states still have these old Jim Crow laws on the book that says, I can challenge anyone. I could say, hey, Ed doesn't live, I don't know where you live, Utah or whatever. Ed doesn't live in Utah. Don't let him vote here.
Yeah.
Now, who am I, Greg Palast, to say Ed Opperman can't vote? Who am I to say that? No, I'm just, but under these Jim Crow laws, you could do that. And you'll see in my film one woman who works for Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican operative, personally challenged 32,000 other voters in Cobb County, Georgia. 32,000 she blocked. She didn't even look at these numbers, these names. I said, I went to her house. You know who I was.
Yeah, you got thrown out of there at gunpoint, practically.
Yeah, I got thrown out literally at gunpoint.
It's a great film.
It was a little bit, it's funny in the film, but it was a little bit scary. In fact, my local Atlanta crew fled for their lives. I don't blame them. They don't know what's going to happen. These people have guns all over the place. And I said, you challenged 32,000 voters. Do you know who they are? She says, well, I can't call 32,000 people. I said, yeah, but you can challenge their right to vote. The Major Gamaliel Turner, again, African-American career military officer, he was challenged by the chairman of the Republican Party in southern Georgia, who, now again, this is a party official. This is not some government guy. This is not some statistician. This is not some expert. This is just some party hack who submitted 4,000 names he challenged. Now, where did he get this? He got this. He downloaded the challenge list for the Fort Benning area from this group True the Vote out of Texas. And what he did was he took this list. So what they do is this group True the Vote, which is a Trump front group. They're the people, by the way, that put out that film 2,000 Mules, which Trump launched from Mar-a-Lago. And they come up with these lists of people for you to challenge. And they gave this Republican hack, who, by the way, likes to dress up, as you'll see in the film Vigilantes Inc. He actually likes to dress up like Doc Holliday, the vigilante. He does that. It's like his shtick. And by the way, with a loaded gun on a holster that he had during the interview, that was a little bit dicey. But he challenged 4,000 voters, most of them from our calls to these voters, most of them were like Major Gamaliel Turner. Most of them were African-American soldiers at Fort Benning assigned to other bases. Like Major Turner was assigned to California. You could be assigned to Iraq. You could be assigned to Germany. Believe it or not, if you're a black soldier, you get a right to vote. Even if you're black, you're allowed to vote as a soldier, absentee. Well, they took away his right to vote. He says, where's my absentee ballot? He called Muskogee County, Georgia, and they said, well, he said, where's my ballot? They said, well, you've been challenged. So what does that mean? I've been challenged. He said, no problem. Just come in, prove you're a citizen, prove you live in Georgia. It's like, what? I'm 2,700 miles away, and you're telling me all I have to do is fly in to prove I'm an American citizen? This is a military officer, career military. And by the way, he did ultimately fly 5,000 miles round trip to make sure that his vote was counted. It required a federal court order, but the other 4,000, again, mostly black soldiers in the Fort Benning area, lost their vote. This is how Trump took Georgia. There were nearly 200,000 challenges in Georgia, and this was not covered in the mainstream. There was a little story in the New York Times before the election, but one thing I want to note about the American media. I'm with BBC Television. When we report election results, we say how many votes are counted for which party, but we also say how many votes were not counted for various reasons. Ballot destroyed, unreadable, blah, blah, blah. But it's negligible. In America, it ain't negligible. Again, I want to give you the bottom line number. This is from government stats that I pulled this from. Kamala Harris would have gotten 3,565,000 more votes if not for these Jim Crow vote suppression tactics. 3.5 million votes. She would have beat Trump's popular vote by 1.2 million. She'd have won 4 more states. But we have these now. We've always had Jim Crow elections. We've always had tougher times for people of color to vote. But this election was really special. This was a serious Jim Crow election.
Well, Greg Palast, in this election, too, because we've always had that thing. It's a two-part question. We've always had that thing where they send the broken machines to the black neighborhoods, right? We've had that. How do they get away with that, by the way? Who's in charge of that they can pull that off every year, every cycle?
Well, and let me give you a very specific example. In 2016, right, Hillary Clinton lost the presidency in part because she lost Michigan, supposedly by 10,000 votes. What the Detroit Free Press announced, it's not Greg Palast, Detroit Free Press, the local press, said the county in Detroit, which is Wayne County, told the state of Michigan, which is run by a Republican governor at the time, look, we are under financial constraints because they were technically in bankruptcy. The state has to approve us buying new voting machines because ours cannot. We're coming into a presidential election. Our machines cannot handle, the scanners cannot handle. They're old. They can't handle all these ballots. The state said, basically, screw you, the Republican officials. And they knew what would happen was the machines would break down. So in the end, out of Detroit, are you ready for this number? 75,000 ballots were never counted because the scanners broke down. And that's when, there was a discussion, remember, about the recount in Michigan. That was never a recount. The Green Party paid for a count of the votes that were never counted, the 75,000 ballots. Now, most of those ballots, almost all those ballots, were in Detroit. Now, who do you think the people of Detroit voted for? Trump?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. So if they counted those ballots, Hillary Clinton would have won Michigan, and if they did the same in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, she would have been president. So, yes, the machines break down. They know which machines are broken. Now, I'm not talking about, let's get away from the kind of Hollywood conspiracy, tinfoil hat stuff where Elon Musk is changing the vote tallies from outer space. Forget all that stuff. This is much simpler, much uglier, which is that they just figure out how to stop counting ballots in Detroit, stop counting ballots in Atlanta. How purging voters. We haven't talked about the purge. So, for example, the number one problem that happened in this election, and again, I want to emphasize, this is from the United States Elections Assistance Commission, which said in their files, you have to dig into this stuff, but the numbers are there, 4,776,706 voters were purged from the voter rolls. That is, your registration eliminated. Almost 5 million people eliminated from the voter rolls. And without any, by the states, without any probable cause. Now, if someone tries to take away your gun, they have to go to federal court or state court to get approval from a judge to take away your gun. But to take away your vote, no problem. They could just, Republican officials, and I'm not being partisan by saying Republican, it's just, that's the facts of this election. Now, I went through the purge list, and I did a report for the ACLU and Black Voters Matter. And I hired the guys from Amazon, and I got a special contract with the United States Postal Service to go through all the names of the people that they in Georgia and Wisconsin that they claimed didn't live at their voting address and therefore should be removed from the voter rolls. In Georgia, we found 198,000 people. Again, these are the Amazon and Postal Service experts, and they said 198,000 people have never moved from their legal voting address. They may have had it like they go on vacation, they put in a change of address, they're military officers, and they go to another base. But these are the permanent homes of 198,000 voters that they removed from the voter rolls of Georgia. Now, who are they? Overwhelmingly, we called 800 of them. Overwhelmingly, these are black voters, including, by the way, I was at the polling station. You'll see this in the film. When a 92-year-old woman in a walker is thrown out of the polling station, she was purged. They said, you're no longer in the voting rolls because you don't live in Atlanta anymore. I went to her house in Atlanta, down the street from the polling station. There on the wall was a picture of her having dinner 50 years earlier.
Martin Luther King, yeah.
With Martin Luther King, her cousin. So if they can remove Martin Luther King's cousin, 92-year-old cousin, 50 years voting at the same station, this is what was happening in this election. And so what we had was a Jim Crow election. I don't say that lightly. So we use the term vote suppression, but that's really a very fancy term for shafting people of color out of their vote, and young people, by the way, who's, they're voters of color too. The color's blue. So this is what happened. These are the numbers. Go to gregpalast.com. Actually look at the numbers, and you will see that not for these new vote suppression tricks. And by the way, the Brennan, as you'll see in the article, you have a little map there. The Brennan Center for Justice at New York University Law School, which is they're considered the stellar outlet for information on voting. They counted 30 states passing laws since the 2020 Biden victory, between 2020 and 2024 election. 30 states passed laws making it harder to vote, particularly aimed at voters of color and students to stop them from voting. 30 states. And that had an effect, and the effect was to take away Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, which gave Donald Trump the election. That's not a mandate. That's a mandate from Jim Crow.
Well, okay, but Greg, first of all, by the way, you can follow along. Trump lost, voter suppression won at gregpalast.com. And you keep reminding me about this film. I'm going to go back and watch that film, Voter Vigilante. It's a great film. And as you remind me about it, it comes back to my memory. I enjoyed it the first time. I know I can enjoy it a second time. But let me ask you this, man. Okay, these parties, they got money, man. They got money. Okay, they got money pouring out of their pores of their body. If Greg Palast can go to the USPS and to Amazon and get this and verify where people live, why can't the parties do that, Greg?
Oh boy, you're asking me why the Democratic Party is
what they're spending their damn money on, bro.
They got $2 billion. They're putting ads on MSNBC. Are you kidding me? So, and I'll tell you something. And here's the nasty little secret of political spending.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party, especially, is enamored of political consultants. When they place an ad on TV or radio or in a paper, they get 15%. If you give money to experts, or you give money to Black Voters Matter Fund or Rainbow Push to get the vote out, or to re-register people who've been purged, all these things, you don't get no 15%. So if you spend your money on protecting the vote, you don't make any money as a consultant. So that's one of the things that's poisoned the Democratic Party. They're flooded with money, but it's all spent in ways to maximize consultant income and not protect the vote.
With their friends. The money goes to their friends.
Yeah. So it goes to their buddies, and they get the, it's like, then they get the speech. It's like, we know how it works, but it is, don't count on, I mean, you know what it comes down to? Don't ask a political party to save your vote. You save your vote. I'm nonpartisan. I work with Black Voters Matter, NAACP, ACLU, Rainbow Push. Why? Because they're nonpartisan. They're concerned about your vote, not about the obviously everyone's affected by the outcome of an election. But we start with protecting your vote. And it's not that I'm for one candidate or the other. I just think that voters, not vigilantes who are self-appointed attackers on your right to vote. I think voters, not vigilantes, should pick our president, should pick our Congress and Senate. And that's what this report is all about. Now, this is a journalistic report, like I say, the stuff I'd write for Rolling Stone, but it's based on the arguments and the hardcore numbers that I present in federal court, where, of course, I can be cross-examined and I have to show all the backup. This is no fooling around. You know what it's like as an investigator. Right. You got to go into a courtroom, and they're going to rip you to pieces.
That's why I brought it up. I want people to understand. You know, Greg Palast is a serious witness here on the show. You know.
Yeah. So I got my degree of all things in economics, working under Milton Friedman at the University of Chicago. Very right wing, but I got a hell of a good numeric education in how to deal with numbers and statistics. And that's what this is all about. It's a lot of statistics, but it comes down to removing people from the voter rolls. It comes down to these vigilante challenges. It comes down to knocking out your mail-in ballot. In fact, the one reason they say, well, how does Democrat ever win? Like in 2020, where the vote challenges were first launched, it was kind of a test drive of this Ku Klux Klan voter challenge system by the Georgia Republican Party. They challenged 180,000 people in 2020 and 88 vigilantes. And what happened was that the groups like Black Voters Matter, we sent postcards to the people who were purged, 80,000 postcards. Latino group, Southwest Voter Education Project, they made 150,000 phone calls to re-register Hispanic voters that were challenged and knocked off. We had a billboard with Rosario Dawson, giant billboard over Atlanta saying, check your registration. By the way, I tell everyone listening, 90 days before an election, please, please, please check your registration. I know you've been voting the same place 40 years. Who cares? They can knock you off. And in most states, 90 days before an election, 60 days before an election, you can re-register. You can re-register. In a lot of states, by the way, you can register on election day. They don't tell you that. But check your registration. Don't assume that you can always, I've always voted at this place. Nah, that ain't going to protect you. Especially if you're a voter of color, you really got to be careful about protecting your registration. But
Greg,
don't count on political
something,
parties to do it.
And it's more of a personal question. I guess maybe the audience, but it's something I'm wondering though, because I talked to you taught me all about the provisional ballots, how it's worthless, right? Mm-hmm. And I tried to explain this to these people I was working with, and they go, tell me I'm stupid, right? But then after the vote, they do this thing. They have a word for it. I forget what it was. Prove the vote or verify. Where they go door to door. It's all hands on deck. The whole office, the top dogs, go door to door to go and verify these votes with the voter. Well, what's that? Yeah, there's a word for that. Do you know what that word is?
Well, it's called curing the ballot.
Curing. There you go.
So what happened in Georgia? That famously. Biden won Georgia in 2020 and gave him the election by a little over 11,000 votes. Now, by the way, because of those purges and everything else, it wasn't really 11,000. It was much bigger. But the official count was 11,000 because you can't, and here's the good news, you can't steal all the votes all the time. But what shocked them, and the reason why Biden took it, is that these grassroots groups, by the way, a group called the Transformative Justice Coalition, headed by a Columbia law professor, Barbara Arnwine, and she used to be head of the U.S. Voting Rights Lawyers Committee for Voting Rights Under the Law. And what she did was she created phone banks that called tens of thousands of voters who had provisional ballots, which were not going to get counted unless they literally physically came into their county voting office and showed new ID. So they literally got like 20,000 people to go in and cure their ballots so that their provisional ballot would be counted. The result was that the Republicans were just shocked out of their underpants because they didn't realize, they thought they'd won the election in Georgia, which is why Trump went crazy. But then these voters came in and said, no, count my ballot. Here's my ID. They literally got 20,000 people to go into those offices, secure their ballots, get their ballots counted. That's how Biden won 2020 out of Georgia and won the presidency. In 2024, the Jim Crow tactics were so widespread in so many states that the voting rights groups were simply overwhelmed. We had, as of August, 3 months before the election, one single group, Trump group, True the Vote, challenged 317,000 voters, which they proudly announced on their website. And then I cited it, and of course they took it down. But their goal was, and if you see the film Vigilantes Inc., you'll see at the beginning, Martin Sheen announces that, but he also says, look, their announced goal was 2 million challenges. And that includes challenges, for example, a group set up by Trump's lawyer, Cleta Mitchell, challenged tens of thousands of people in Philadelphia, which was one of the keys to Trump supposedly winning Pennsylvania. We do have some stories on NPR, the New York Times, et cetera, before an election, but after an election, like NPR said, okay, 1 in 7 ballots are disqualified. They emphasized 1 in 7 Democratic ballots are disqualified. So NPR, let me ask you a question. If they disqualified all these ballots, did you calculate whether that changed the outcome of the election? Because it did. Why don't they say after the election? By the way, remember those vote suppression tactics you're talking about, the voter IDs and the vigilante challenges and the purges and all that stuff? It actually they've never, ever said, by the way, that overturns an election. They will not, the American press will never touch that question. What happened with all those vote suppression tactics? Do you think that 30 states would have passed laws if it had no effect?
But Greg,
I do understand that we had a government that was, cognitively impaired, but there was no excuse for this.
I was kind of hoping that with this article in your investigation here, that some kind of good going to come out of this.
I hope so. Well, let's put it this way: I'm here in Chicago to speak with the Reverend Jesse Jackson, where we've run campaigns against the vote suppression tactics before. The NAACP and others used, as they say, they used my material as the basis for lawsuits and the basis for political and legislative campaigns. So they take my numbers. They do use them. I will say Jesse Jackson actually met with President Biden and Kamala Harris a few weeks before the election and handed them a copy of my film and said, watch Greg Palast's film. They, by the way, these people, like Biden and Harris know who I am. And they said, watch Greg's film. But the most important thing is do something about it. Yeah. And I will say that for the first time in Democratic Party history, they did hire a lawyer, Mark Elias, whose job was to take on these vote suppression tactics. But he had this little office. I mean, it was like, are you kidding me? At least they took a step, but still, a baby step was not what was needed. What was needed is a full court press in 20 states to allow people to get their votes back. But that's why you cannot count on political parties to save your vote. You have to protect your vote and work and join with the grassroots organizations that will help protect your vote. We did have a big challenge in Nevada by a group called the Pigpen Project, of all things. And luckily, some of that was blocked by the courts. But again, it's not the Democratic Party which comes to save your vote. It's the voting rights organizations. And that's crucial. So you save your vote. Don't expect someone else to do it.
Now, Greg, this election, we had some rather unusual stuff. We had bomb threats and some of these mail-in ballots or fires at these postal drop-off locations. That's brand new, right? Have we had that before?
Yes. No. For the first time in Atlanta, which is, of course, solid gold Democratic, solid blue. In Atlanta, 31 polling stations were closed because of bomb threats. 31 polling stations closed because of bomb threats. The second thing is, I mentioned that African Americans, especially in urban areas like Atlanta, vote using use drop boxes. They don't, for good reason. Just like Gamalio Turner lost his vote, they said it was late, even though he put it in more than a week in advance. So people use drop boxes because then gets instantly registered. However, the Georgia legislature, in an infamous bill called SB 202, cut the number of drop boxes in Atlanta by 75%, but they increased the number of drop boxes in white cities. So they cut back black cities, they increased the drop boxes in white cities. Not only that, but they locked away the drop boxes at night. The whole point of a drop box is that you can, put in your ballot 24/7.
It's going to be safe, yeah.
Because there's a camera on every ballot, again, has its own barcode. Every single mail-in drop box in places like Atlanta, Georgia, Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, they have video cameras over those drop boxes. So you know exactly who's there and who's doing what. The state of Georgia, which is, very right-wing Republican, went through every single drop box ballot, again, because you have a barcode, and there was not one single illegal vote. Yet they use this as an excuse to shut down these drop boxes.
Well, also, too, if they have cameras on them,
big effect.
If they have cameras, don't they see the guy with the match and the can of gas showing up there?
Well, that's the other problem. If someone decides they're going to simply burn, as you saw in several places where some of these MAGA knots literally burnt up the ballot. They just literally threw some gasoline and a match into a drop box and burnt it up. So we do have that problem. Yes, so you do have video cameras on all these things. Now, one thing that they did find out when they said, these black men are stuffing the ballots, well, they had this film, 2,000 Mules, where they call black men mules. They said 2,000 of them are paid $10 each to stuff ballot drop boxes. Well, first of all, where do you get those ballots to stuff the ballot drop boxes? And they showed a bunch of black men putting in ballots in the drop boxes. Those black men sued the distributor of the film, Sinclair, and because there's all those people were legitimate voters, but they've been harassed. They've had to move their homes, everything else, because when you call out Donald Trump and his gangsters on violence and vote suppression, they come after you, and this is a big problem. So yes, so we have to have a new voting rights movement, and that is the only way we are going to, and restoring the voting rights movement. We had Martin Luther King cross the bridge at Selma in 1965. We got the Voting Rights Act. Well, guess what? We're going from Voting Rights Act to Voting Rights Wrongs, and we have to take action to restore the Voting Rights Act because we don't have it. But we do have to some extent, fight the Democratic Party because you have guys like Joe Biden saying anyone who challenges the vote count in America is undermining democracy. Well, sorry, Joe. The people who took away Major Gamaliel Turner's vote, the people who took away Major Turner's vote, those are the people attacking democracy. The people who took away Martin Luther King's cousin's vote, those are the people attacking democracy, not the people who are exposing the Jim Crow tactics. So, again, you've got a big problem in that you have some elements of the Democratic Party, especially, I hate to put it this way, but the white elements of the Democratic Party, who just simply do not believe that there's such a thing as racial vote suppression in the United States anymore. They agree with the Supreme Court decision of 2013, which just gutted the Voting Rights Act, saying, well, Jim Crow has been eradicated. That's a quote from the opinion of the court. And unfortunately, too many Democrats believe Jim Crow has been eradicated. Well, if you're black, Jim Crow ain't been eradicated by any means, not close to it.
We can't forget, too, Joe Biden is the one that took away the primary. Look how that worked out.
Yeah.
That
was brilliant. And, talk about attacking democracy. So you don't let people vote, and then you...
But also, too, it gets you excited. People go out, you get involved. There's a process going on. It's debates, Otherwise, what? You don't even know. Quick
Right,
question.
Yes, go ahead.
We used to have Jimmy Carter out there. He would travel to different countries and monitor the voting, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, though, who do we have besides Greg Palast? Who else is out there doing what you're doing, bro?
Well, they are out there. You do have have all these voting rights groups. I would get Latasha Brown of Black Voters Matter.
Okay.
And it was great. And you also have some really top experts at, for example, Gerald Griggs, president of the NAACP of Georgia. He's the guy that put R. Kelly in prison. This guy's a top trial attorney, knows his numbers. You have some great professors that I've worked with. But again, professors tend to put their stuff in academic articles. They don't get out there. They're not like me. They're not out there doing a popular journalism, taking their stuff to get it out. I used to be a professor of statistics, so I'm not knocking being a professor. What I'm saying is that one thing I realized being a professor and writing academic papers, you're not going to affect the policy discussion. But there are some great people out there. The problem is that they're lonely voices. They work with the voting rights groups. We're not getting any backing from the official parties, very little. I mean, Kamala Harris told Jesse Jackson when he said, watch Greg's film Vigilantes, she said, when I'm president, I'm going to sign the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Well, here's the problem, Kamala. If you don't stop the vote suppression before the election, you ain't going to be elected. You ain't signing nothing, and that's what happened. You cannot say, well, when I'm in power, I'm going to do something about this. Then it's too late. So that's the issue. And again, I rely on these hard numbers. That's why it took me a couple months. I mean, I wish I could have come out with this a week after the election, but I can't. I got to wait for numbers. I'm still waiting for some numbers. I'm going to probably update these. I'm sure. I have zero doubt it's going to be worse than what I've calculated here once I get the full numbers. But I'm not going to get those for about a year from the government, if we get them at all. Because remember, under Trump, they're shutting down all these agencies, and I don't think that the Elections Assistance Commission is going to survive Doge and Elon Musk, because they're going to say all this does is give Greg Palast ammunition and give the voting rights groups ammunition to say, look at how many voters were wiped out. So if I had to put money on it, they're going to shut down the agency which tracks voting irregularities.
Greg Palast, let's say a miracle happens, right? I don't know what the miracle would be, but somehow we manage. Greg Palast is in charge of U.S. elections. What would you do to revamp everything? How would you reorganize everything?
Well, first of all, we need a simple American commitment that every American citizen should have their ballot and have their ballot counted. We all get our vote. If we commit to that basic principle, the rest are just logistics. We don't have a right to vote in the United States Constitution, and no other nation we recognize as democratic has mass purges of voters, has mass disqualification of voters, allows one voter to challenge another, this vigilante nonsense. But we have to first commit ourselves that every American gets a ballot and their ballot gets counted, and that's what we need. And of course, one of the reasons why vote theft is easy in America, that is election theft, stealing it from the voters, is the Electoral College. Because if you really had to try to swipe the entire popular vote, that's very hard to do. I mean, Trump did that with 3.5 million votes here, but if the Electoral College is a anti-democratic nightmare that we have to deal with. But again, if we simply get rid of some of these Jim Crow tricks, like I said, Biden won in 2020 in Georgia. Raphael Warnock, John Ossoff, two progressive Democrats, one black, one Jewish American, and they won in Georgia because the voting rights groups just killed themselves to cure the ballots, to get people back on the voter rolls, etc. But that's the only thing we've got going for us.
Wait, Greg Palast,
I'm going to have to get going. Yeah.
You think we need to do away with the Electoral College? I've always thought that, because then the emphasis would be on the big states. In California, they would run everything. They would control everything, right? With the most population.
Right now, that's what we have, is that because if we just had a popular vote for president, it would be much harder to manipulate. Like, remember, in Florida in 2000, George Bush became president by just 537 votes in Florida. And that was after, as I discovered, 58,000 black men were removed from the voter rolls. You remove 58,000 black men, and you win by the presidency by 500 votes.
Yeah, Hank Asher did that. We talked about that. But the thing is, where would I find a Greg Palast article to educate me on the Electoral College?
Oh, I haven't
hopeless.
written much about the Electoral College simply because I don't. Back in the 60s, we just came within a couple votes in the U.S. Senate of eliminating the Electoral College. But I don't see that happening now because all these little GOP states where you have, where you have South Dakota, Florida, with, and remember, we also have a crazy Senate system where South Dakota gets 2 electoral votes. And California gets, 2 senators, and California gets 2 senators. Yeah. So it comes off of that business. So, I mean, there's no miracles here. I would say that we just have a new voting rights movement and knock down some of these new tricks like the vigilante vote challenges. So, again, go to gregpalast.com, watch a movie, take your popcorn. You can stream Vigilantes, Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitmen. As Ed says, it is entertaining. It is a film. But it will. If you pass that link around, and again, it's no charge, I think we begin the education and political process. And
don't forget, too, the book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Okay.
Yes.
And the article, too, Trump lost, voter suppression won, at gregpalast.com. You just took all the words out of my mouth. I was going to plug your movie just now anyway, but that's 10 minutes we got. We got about 7 minutes left.
Okay.
RFK Jr. You wrote a book with him. You were buddies with him. What do you make of this confirmation hearings? You don't see anything like brown on his tongue and his lips?
Here's the thing. Bobby was a good friend of mine. He was a co-author. He co-wrote books, comic books even. I mean, we did a lot together. We did film together. He's a good friend and very progressive, one of the smartest men I've ever met in my life. The problem is that I watched him mentally deteriorate. And I hate to talk about this in public because it is a friend of mine. You don't like to talk about the mental condition of your friends. But this is a guy, this is now beyond the issue of friendship because he's about to do something really destructive. And as you know, a couple things happened. Number one, he had a worm in his brain. This is no joke. I'm not, it's a sad situation. He literally had a physical worm eating away at his brain. And he was already in a highly emotionally fraught state. Who could get over watching your dad have his brains blown out on television when you're 14 years old? That affected him enormously. And the other thing is that he really started deteriorating rapidly when his wife committed suicide after calling him up, and he was blamed for her suicide. It was a terrible, terrible thing. So I'm explaining why what the man you see there is not the Bobby Kennedy that we knew and that was a friend and a co-author. He started losing it. And I was on the phone with him, and he was totally losing it. And my associate at the time waving me off, get off the phone, get off the phone. We can't have anything to do with this guy because he's going psycho, and we have to kind of dissociate because of our work. And so I ended up having to dissociate from Bobby because he was becoming, frankly, psychotic. And this makes me feel really bad talking about these things. But on the other hand, the guy is, Trump wants to put him in charge of our health care. And what are we going to do? Have lepers begging for money on the street? I hope Jesus comes back because he's going to have a lot of lepers to kiss. I mean, Bobby has said, which is unbelievable, that he's going to put a hold on all investigations of infectious diseases for 8 years. Well, part of the United States government's operation out of CDC is specifically to track infectious diseases all over the world, which is how we even found out about COVID. So I'm very concerned when someone says, I'm not going to even investigate infections. Well, hey, 7 million people died from COVID already, 1 million in the United States. And that's just one disease. We've got the avian flu coming, et cetera. And under Trump's orders, farmers are not, farmers are supposed to get messages about the avian flu so they know, frankly, if they have to call their flocks. And they're not getting the messages about avian flu. This is like, are we kidding here? We're going to have the return of smallpox now?
It's terrifying.
So that's why I had to talk about Kennedy's mental condition. He should not be a bus driver, let alone head of Health and Human Services. And, I'm sorry, Bobby. I know you're a friend, but, your personal melees and psychosis cannot be used to harm the American public. It's that simple.
Greg, I can sympathize with you there. Just recently I had an experience of running into an old friend, and it was the saddest thing I've gone through in my recent life, just to see an old friend and what's become of them. But, Greg, thank you so much for sharing that with us and all your hard work, man. Thank you so much, brother. And thank you for coming on the show. Yeah, Greg Palast, GregPalast.com. The article we've been talking about is Trump Lost, Voter Suppression Won. The book is The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. God, what an awful title to have to read. And the movie is Vigilante Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitman. Great movie. Greg Palast, thank you so much, my friend.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Good night, sir.